read all the questions. I'm up to date.
Good morning, people of LinkedIn, and good morning if you are watching on YouTube. Good morning, Jazz. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, and chanced to be here with you.
Good. Jazz has literally just jumped on, right? So just to let you know, if you've just joined, please do say good morning in the chat. But often I often have a few minutes before we go live, but Jazz has literally just jumped on. So Jazz, thank you for making it this morning. How's your week been?
It's been busy, a lot of meetings all around coaching and AI, those kind of things, but also some very, I suppose, human things, like talking to people about their awakening and consciousness, all sorts of things.
Wow. Okay, we're probably we're gonna touch on some of these, because I think there is something about AI that these conversations can really sort of, I guess, veer into, questions around all kinds of quite deep things, humanity and all of those things, right? It almost becomes quite existential. I feel. Good morning, Adam Rude. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. If you are joining us live, please do say good morning in the chat. Maybe let us know how your week's been, and any questions that you've got as well for Jazz Rasool. Please do check out his intro, his bio. I'm going to read an intro. I've started doing something, Jazz. I've started getting ChatGPT to write the introductions, right? So ChatGPT has written your introduction, and then you get to mark it out of 10, right? You can mark the attempt out of 10. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Jazz Rasool, Director of Human and AI Coaching and Mentoring, and a TEDx speaker. So Jazz has an incredible background spanning neuroscience, mindfulness, AI, and coaching, and he's worked on everything from astronaut training in VR to developing tools that align purpose with performance. In his TEDx talk, Technology for Mental Diversity, Creativity, and Innovation, he explored how well-being, inclusion, and tech come together to drive meaningful change. Welcome, Jazz. What would you give ChatGPT for that introduction out of 10?
I'd give it a 9.5 out of 10. That pretty much.
Oh, wow. Amazing. We're in good hands. We're in good hands. ChatGPT's earned its subscription today, shall we say? So, Jazz, thank you so much. And I know we were introduced through a mutual contact of ours, Junior Beeman, who is a coach at NatWest, and obviously coaching is a big part of what you do, and we're gonna get into some of that this morning. But this whole topic of AI, I mean, you must spend a lot of time talking about AI, right? Because obviously it's in your bio and everything. And just before we get into sort of some of the specifics, how long have you been sort of in this space and delving into the world of AI? Just tell me about how you got into that.
I'm about 1 year away from being 60. So it's been a lot of years. I remember the first time I ever did anything with AI was when I was 14 years old, 1980. And I found the code for a chatbot, believe it or not, in 1980. And the chatbot, though, had originally been written in 1966, which is the year I was born. So I found the code, I put it on a computer at school, and it's a chatbot called Eliza. It's based on Carl Rogers' therapeutic approaches. And you sit there and you have a conversation with a chatbot. And that was my first introduction to AI. And then a few years later, while studying at college, I created a game for playing noughts and crosses. And it was never able to be defeated. You could only draw to it or you could lose to it. So I think I did pretty well in that. But I really wanted to become an astronaut. And my first degree was astrophysics. And I found that astronauts who'd been into space, they'd gone through shifts in consciousness. And I wondered whether low gravity environments were affecting their brains or something. So instead of going off to NASA and becoming an astronaut, I got more interested in the brain. And I did a master's degree in computer modeling of the brain and understand the neuroscience of consciousness, drugs that work on the brain, like anesthetics that make you lose consciousness. And it got me very connected into mind-body medicine. And I taught all over the world on how the
Right.
mind affects the body, including around mindfulness. I even became a Chinese medicine practitioner myself. So far removed from the
Wow.
science I was actually doing. But it was around that time that I met a partner who was an executive coach. And I
Okay.
noticed a lot of psychological models for use for coaching were very Western. And I thought, where's
Right.
the ones from India and Africa? And I built a model from that. And in 2008, I encoded all of that into an AI coaching platform. So for 17 years now, with hundreds of clients, lots of, design of best practices,
Yeah.
I've put together that stuff. But it was only when I think it was 2015, 19,
Yeah.
I was working at a university. And one of the projects that we worked on was working for NASA. And I spent time at the base for the International Space Station, working with astronaut trainers for 3 years, surrounded by spaceships,
Wow.
using AI, biometrics, virtual reality design training to improve the emotional state of the astronauts so they perform better as part of their ground training. And some of that equipment is now actually up on the space station.
Wow.
So when I left there, I got back into executive coaching more. And I noticed how many people were doing stuff around AI and also learning and development as well. And I joined the government's task force, if you like, on technology for the technology businesses in the UK. And now I do a lot of work with them around skills and diversity, but a lot of it's focused on AI and technology and future workforces. So that's the kind of spread of things that's led me to where I am.
Wow. Yeah. What was really fascinating there as you were covering that, I mean, and a lot of people think of AI as this thing that's kind of just suddenly become popular in the last couple of years. There is something about the popularity of it, the massive growth, the acceleration. But as you say, you were sort of like building chatbots like way, 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 way back, right? And I don't think some of us think about almost like the models, the learning and all of that sort of thing, or a machine that you can interact
I did
with
it to
that
make
kind of
games
operates.
first because I want to
Yeah,
play. I want to see how intelligently you could play a game with me. So
yeah,
playing noughts and crosses, that was interesting. It's one of the most basic games, right? So you learn a lot when you gamify things and you play with people.
right. Yeah, yeah. That is incredible. And then, let's get into, I guess, some of the conversations around AI currently, and where AI is. There is a lot of and I was talking about this literally at the weekend. There's a lot of optimism about AI, and a lot of people are talking about its potential for good, particularly, say, for example, in actually the medical or the health sphere. But then it feels to me like certainly over the last, I'm going to say like maybe 2 to 3 months, even there have been more scare stories that are going around, or a lot more scaremongering. So there is a lot of fear, and even the billionaires, the way that they're talking, I think is making everybody quite worried. So from your perspective and based on your expertise, are there any concerns that we should be taking seriously, but in contrast, where do you see the most exciting potential for good?
Well, I've often compared what's going on with radioactivity.
Okay.
Marie Curie, when she first discovered radioactivity, she found that when she got a grip on it, gave a nice warm feeling. And a lot of people saw the glow that came with it, and they put it in moisturizers and they're putting it on their faces and things like this. But of course, later on, it was also used for developing nuclear medicine and power and things like that.
Yeah.
The problem is that those people who were putting it as moisturizer on their face, soon their hair started falling out and things, and people realized, oh, hang on a minute, this has got invisible harms to it. We need to approach this. If you want to get the benefit from it, we need to approach it with the safety first, ethics first kind of approach, right?
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same with AI. It has invisible harms. It has bias issues.
Right.
It has discrimination issues. It has issues which are hallucinatory. And people say, oh, that's a feature because it's part of its creativity. But actually, no, when you're presenting false information and fake information, and people who are not really that clued in take it as gospel, then that's a problem in society, because it can spread information which is false, especially about communities and in areas of diversity and inclusion issues, for example. So there are invisible harms, and ethics is the safety shield for those things. Compliance, like EU AI Act, for example, Online Safety Act, these kind of things. So you've got to approach it with safety first approach, and then you can take advantage of the benefits and the innovation. And with the government, for example, their priorities are very simple. From a national security perspective, it's safety first, security first, right? And then only then do they then look at innovation. And then the last thing they look at, strangely, is ethics, because they want economic advantage when it comes to innovation. And people always prefer to leave ethics to last. But I'm someone who breathes ethics. And I know if you do not breathe ethics, you're going to get into trouble further down the line. You're going to cause harms. And when you haven't put systems into place to prevent them, especially around mental health issues, for example, where people use AI and things start to happen that convince them of doing things that are going to lead to self-harm, for example, and suicide, those kind of things.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, the one thing that you mentioned there, which was people using it for economic advantage. I think a lot of people have started to think about that in terms of, because we see nowadays, even without AI, we're all aware of things like scams or people trying to concentrate power, right, for their own use and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, if you think about the capacity of AI to potentially sort of amplify that impact is quite
about power
it's quite
rather
worrying.
than empowerment. And that's a really important distinction. I think once we get empowerment on the table as well as power, then maybe we'll get people who are exercising things with responsibility, because power does not automatically come with responsibility. You might have heard that phrase, from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. I like to think about the reverse of that. With great responsibility comes true power.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we've started to touch on how AI is impacting the world of work. Although I must admit, sometimes when I certainly when I deal with big corporates, I almost feel that it's still taking quite a while to actually have an impact. And I say that just a really trivial example, but I use an AI note taker, as I know a lot of people do now when I go to meetings. Use an AI note taker that summarizes the meeting, records it, sends a transcript, maybe even drafts an email to sort of follow up to the person, right? And I'm amazed often how many corporates, when I go into my note taker, follows me in, and they're like, "What's that?" They've not sort of come across it, and I'm like, I see it with a lot of entrepreneurs and freelancers and stuff, but it does feel as though the corporate world, in terms of big corporates, that some of it anyway is still a little bit behind the curve in terms of AI. So do you, I mean, I don't know whether you'd agree with that, but do you think AI is starting to reshape the world of work, and what are your views on the potential impact, if we just start there first of all? So do you see it having an impact?
I don't think corporations are necessarily behind. They're more like cautious. So I did a presentation to a national organization recently, and I said, look, there's two ways you can approach it. You can approach it in a very experimental way, where you just try stuff out and there's no compliance, there's no alignment to a business's standards, mission, values, strategy, those kind of things. Or you can approach it the other way around, where you don't even generate any kind of content or play with the AI at all until the rules and policies and compliance and everything are in place first. You get the context right before you get the content right. And I found that a lot of businesses vary between those two spectrums. The problem with the experimental approach is it's not a safety first approach, right? However, so long as you're doing things which are to do with changing what you do and how you do things, you're on your own and you're not doing it together with other people, and it hasn't got consequences in terms of money and other those things, then it's probably okay to use. So this is very much focusing on the things that lead you to use AI to change what you do and how you do things. These are the lower common denominators of change. But when it comes to that's like transactional, transitional, and transformational kinds of change, right? But when it comes to helping people change who they are, that's transcending who they are in terms of their identity, for example, their personality and their character. That's more sensitive territory. As soon as you cross that boundary into that space, you can do one of two things. You can either trigger trauma in people, or you can trigger transformation. And it requires a really fine, precise radar, I would say, of compassion and compliance. It's interesting, those two opposite things in that space, for you to ensure that you don't trigger trauma and you're more likely to trigger transformation in people,
Yeah.
So that's where I spend a lot of my time, on that boundary, on that gray zone, and trying to see
Right.
how do we make sure we don't cause harm here, and instead we
Yeah.
generate amazing transformation.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of that? And you mentioned there sort of transactional, transitional, transformational, and then potentially use of AI where it actually starts to impact on somebody's, sort of like personality. Just give us some examples of what that might look like in the workplace when it's done either safely or not safely, almost like too experimental.
Well, if you look at learning and development or talent management or coaching or mentoring, for example, these are classic areas, especially occupational therapy and counseling and psychotherapy uses in workplace stress, for example. These are the areas where these things matter. When you're doing a transactional thing, you're just helping someone with something small and trivial in the moment. All right. It might just be you just had an argument with somebody. How do you resolve this little conflict that happened over the water cooler? Transitional is where there's been a number of these incidents happening over time, and it's causing a shift in people's engagement, and you might want to address that. So transactions add up to transitions, if you like. Okay. But then if you're going through a change program and you're making lots of small changes to policy, to the way people are learning in terms of the equipment they're using, and you're leading up to a transformation, like it could be a merger and acquisition, for example, or it could be a culture change program, then those are things where you need to do more organizational development work, where you're working with people in teams, having town council meetings and so on. But there comes a point where you might need to do something, especially with mergers and acquisitions, where you're changing the brand, you're changing the identity of the organization. That might even change the culture of the organization, the people, and how they feel they belong there. And that sense of self-identity, it could cause stress for people that this isn't the right fit for them anymore. They don't belong here. It could be diversity and inclusion problems. But more importantly, when it comes to learning and when it comes to well-being, it could lead to people experiencing stress that leads to strain, that could lead to suffering, and that could lead to breakdowns and trauma. On the opposite side, if they get it right, people's well-being could improve. They could improve flourishing. They could improve productivity and performance and a sense of belonging, and even have a company that finally makes an impact on the market beyond its products, So that's the range of things that could possibly happen across that spectrum.
Right. So, and am I right in thinking then that your view would be that when, for example, if an organization is going through transformational change, which actually I was thinking about this, and I was having a conversation this week, there are lots of organizations, even at the moment. I mean, I don't want to mention the R word as in like recession, right? But certainly in the UK, there are a lot of organizations that are going through some major restructurings. And are you saying that there is potentially more danger of, say, for example, using like an AI first model to maybe support individuals through transformational change? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I've been recently saying, even some people who are trying to moderate this saying, oh, look, let's take a human-centric approach, right? And I've said, no.
Yeah.
There are some humans that are bad actors out there, right? And you don't know what their motivations are. We need to work with something deeper that we all share and that we each possess, and that ultimately we want to really be representative of who we are as a race, if you like, a human race. And I said that's our humanity. We need to put our humanity first. And when you take a humanity first approach, that we're going to advance as a civilization. We're probably going to end up respecting the planet in the process. That people who go to work are going to flourish, and it's not all about machines and automation and profit, for example. And this is what Industry 5.0, the fifth industrial revolution that we're in right now, is all about. It's all about harmonizing human and machine intelligence in a virtuous way, where we make the intelligence more advanced, but then the intelligence makes us more advanced on the inside. We advance our inner technology of our humanity. And that's the most advanced technology there is. It's got billions of years of data sets, millions of years of algorithms, and it's far, far smarter than AI because it has empathy, it has a conscience, it has consciousness, curiosity. There's so many things, but how many people don't use that most advanced technology within themselves first, and they keep offloading to the AI? It's just such a waste of a gift that we have.
I'm gonna ask you a question, and I'm gonna switch my camera off because I've got to go and I've got to plug my laptop in. I've realized it's not plugged in. But what is the role of leaders, especially in this transformational change? Rather than kind of almost like putting the machines, you know, and there's lots of organizations talking about, for example, digital transformation currently, like radically transforming. So what is the role of leaders in supporting employees and colleagues through that?
Well, they've got to take that meta view of what's going on across all their systems in their business. They've got people they've got to look after. There's people ecosystems, if you will, departments, functions and projects and so on. And then there's infrastructure. They've got technology. They might have AI. They might have digital platforms. They have data, bases and all sorts of, architectures, if you will. Those are ecosystems that need to work together as well. And when you bring AI into those systems, it's got to fit. If it doesn't, if people just drop it in and automate things without preparing people through awareness, through helping them just adapt first before the technology even comes in, then there's going to be a failure to integrate, let alone adopt, and automate. And too many people do that. They automate first and they don't raise awareness first. They take the reverse route. And that can cause huge employment problems in terms of employment law, union backlash, and all sorts of other issues as well from customers and suppliers. So leaders must take an approach which is awareness first, then adaptation, then slowly bring the technology in, augmentation, and then informally start to integrate it in your processes and policies. And if it works, make it formal, make it adopted, make it a part of the culture of the organization. And some tasks you may discover just don't need human beings and it's a waste of their humanity. Please hand that over and automate it, but do not do the reverse. Do not automate first and then hope people are going to adapt and become aware later on. It just doesn't work.
It's an absolutely fascinating way of thinking about it, and a lot of people will know. My background is in transformations. There's something about something about what you're saying in terms of the order, which I think is really insightful. And I'm thinking about the role that employee network leaders play. And recently, I was asked by an employee network to go into their organisation and talk about restructuring and talk about how leaders can support their colleagues through change, and we know, because of the work that we do, and I know that you work with employee network leaders. Often when things get difficult, employee network leaders are often the place that colleagues go to. So if, for example, there is an employee network leader that's listening to this morning, and they've got there may be an organization going through transformation, and they have colleagues or members coming to them, sort of like feeling, a little bit sort of out of sorts because of the way that this transformation is being done, and the focus on, as you were saying, almost like the focus on automation first and people second. What sort of thing is it that the employee network leaders can do? How can they almost like try to influence and, sort of shape what's happening and give reassurance to colleagues?
I'd keep one thing in mind. There's something I call a triggering concern that people will typically register when these things happen. And the triggering concern might be a concern which raises the issue of danger, of trauma, or harm. Right. But it equally could be a concern that raises a possibility, an opportunity of doing something amazing and empowering, for example, too. And it's really important to have sensitivity towards these triggering concerns, because the triggering concerns are what will later trigger annoyance, suffering, pain, or they can trigger empowerment and helping people to advance and have more potential realized from themselves. And there's two things that drive it. The first is in a room with AI, you got to realize that human beings, the humanity they have within them, is the most advanced technology in the room, and you should be using that first, right? If you recognize and get that first within your employees and realize, look, these people have evolved their consciousness, their empathy, their compassion, their curiosity, their critical thinking, emotional, social intelligence. Why are you not using that first? Then bring in the AI maybe to start making some kind of wider sense of it and get some patterns or some things that could help you devise strategy. But always start with the human being first, and specifically start with their humanity first, especially collectively. One person's humanity isn't enough. Work with groups, work with teams, look at the collective humanity of your departments and say, how do we serve this so that they flourish enough to be productive, to add to performance, improve the performances of the company's bottom line in terms of revenue, and not return necessarily on investment. I've used this term. You need to have a return on intention. Return on intention.
Right.
Now, when you get return on intention, sometimes you don't make a profit, but you know what? You make an impact. And people look at you and go, maybe that's what we should be following, because the momentum, the energy you generate, that kind of stuff is sustainable. But if you just go on investment rather than intention, most brands don't have sustainability in what they do. So that's the first thing. Humanity is the most advanced technology in the room. Please turn to that first, and then bring AI to help out. The second thing I'll say is I'm speaking to the minister from the CTO for the Ministry of Justice here in the UK last year.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm using AI to process probation applications to speed up people being released. And I thought about it. I raised the hand about it and said, look, if you keep offloading stuff to do with your competence to AI, your competence will eventually atrophy. And I came up with a phrase and said, most people are familiar with the phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And I said, what we're finding when people do things out of convenience in using AI, because they're low on energy, they're low on curiosity, they're low on ethics, they're low on resources, what they'll do typically is, for convenience, they will default to AI. Now, our defaults, how we default to things defines us. If you think about it, if whatever we default to ultimately defines us. And I said, we're going to find a future where, if we're not careful, and this is just the nature of human beings, this is what they do, convenience eats competence for breakfast, right? Yeah. So if convenience is what you always go for, your competence will suffer. You will atrophy in your skills. And when that's collectively done in an organization, that's dangerous. You do not want to have people's competency, capability, capacity, conscience to atrophy. You need that stuff for oversight, not human in the loop, but actually human on the loop stuff. Even humans creating new loops for things. You need that stuff. So do not indulge too much in a situation where you're letting AI lead you to a situation where your convenience is always eating your competence for breakfast.
Yeah. This is absolutely fascinating, and you know, I mean, we could talk for a long time. I can absolutely see now why Junior recommended me to you. Absolutely. You, and Junior said, good morning, hello friends, happy Friday, Junior. Adam, I know you said the stream seems to have stopped. I've just clicked onto my phone and I think we're still live, but the technology maybe is slightly in and out. So just bear with us this morning. Jazz, you said something there which was and I've written it down because I have to remember this: humanity is the most advanced technology in the room. I think I might actually get that put on a t-shirt, and Junior knows that I'm all about the slogan t-shirts, right? I might actually have to get that put on a t-shirt. Does that mean that you believe that that we are smarter than AI?
There's a famous
and
scientist.
Is it as binary as that?
It is actually. Having studied molecular biology and studied consciousness as opposed to and computing as well, which is modeled on the brain and neural networks, but not modeled necessarily on all the intelligences of who we are, just the brain intelligence, not the gut intelligence, not the immune intelligence, not natural intelligence. I've realized something that is echoed by the Nobel Prize winner Roger Penrose, who said, look, you know, computers compute, and human beings and consciousness and their intelligence excuse me, is something that has consciousness and understanding attached to it. AI does not have understanding and consciousness attached to its intelligence, and that's because understanding, life, consciousness, empathy, compassion, these are not things that can be put into an algorithm. They can't be put into maths. Then they're what you described as non-computable. And if they're non-computable, they can't be computed. Therefore, you know, those humanity aspects that we have of ourselves, you can't put them into an algorithm. And this is a Nobel Prize winner in physics who wrote a book all about AI and consciousness. And I really respect what he says, because as much as I've done, I know from a human spiritual perspective, There's something in me which goes beyond silicon chips and numbers. I know that, I feel it, and that's the most important thing. Humans feel first through their lived experience, common sense and wisdom, and then they develop intelligence and knowledge and information. AIs do the reverse, and they have data, information, then knowledge, and hopefully intelligence. And they long for wisdom and lived experience, but they're never going to get it because they keep borrowing it from us. They have to borrow it from us.
Yeah, it's like it's secondhand, right?
But they're certainly not going to have humanity. Even that, ultimately, they're going to have to borrow from us.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Let me just, and then there's another term as well, some of these concepts that you've really sort of like delved into, and this kind of touches on your TEDx talk. So you've spoken about this term mental diversity. Just talk about what that is as a concept, and then how it links to inclusion. What is that for me? Mental diversity. Junior has said, yes, let's add it to the t-shirt list. Absolutely. I've got a whole list, many of which Junior has given me for my slogan t-shirts. But humanity is the most advanced technology in the room. I absolutely love that. Mental diversity, then, what is that, and how does it link to inclusion?
Well, it came out as a result of looking at the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in workplaces. And I noticed how people kept saying, oh, well, it's not the people in the room, it's more to do with the perspectives in the room. Okay. And that meant that cognitive diversity was a phrase that kept bandied around a lot. It's different styles of thinking that matters. And I thought, hold on a moment. If you've got thinking from a colonial culture, but there's a diversity in it, is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about something which includes countries that have never been colonialized and have indigenous wisdom and are connected to nature and those kind of things? For me, I like to use the word, I forget the word diversity. I've gone up a level, and I said, actually, what we need is a diversity of diversities, because we need diversity in our infrastructure, our technology infrastructures. And the biggest thing that happened this year for me was I was writing a report about how in America, a 1,000-company survey by resume.org said that 40% of companies were transferring their funds for DEI initiatives over to AI initiatives, reallocating the funds. And I'm thinking, hold on, if you don't have oversight from DEI, you're going to get increased bias and discrimination, right? And therefore, and this is what I found why they were doing it. They found DEI initiatives, when you try and integrate them into a diversity of systems like technology systems and other systems, if they don't fit, if they're not helped to integrate, then people look at the diversity initiatives and think it's a waste of time. So what we actually need is a diversity of diversity. We need diversity in technology ecosystems. We need diversity in company operations and policies. And if we have the right kinds of diversity, when we bring diversity of people in, they're going to feel like they belong. They won't feel rejected because someone took the time to integrate them into their existing ecosystems. That's the reason why there's defunding going on, because people have failed to integrate diversity from humans into diversity of ecosystems within businesses.
Absolutely.
And when you get that right, then you get real human flourishing happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. It took me a while to figure out what you meant by diversity of diversity, but I think I get it. And what you said there in terms of, I've been banging on about this actually, particularly with employee network leads in terms of and with HR and DI practitioners, because there's something about if you're in terms of how you summed it up there in terms of diversity within the ecosystems, if we like embedded these things such that almost like diversity across the spectrum of process, policy, all of that was kind of embedded, it would be really hard actually to just roll back, right? Nobody would be rolling back because it would be embedded.
I've come across recently. Here's an example. If you look at diversity programs, they can be just for the company might not have any diversity policy. They might have just one for show. They might have one just for business's sake, and then one that's properly embodied and genuine. And then if you combine that with equal AI policies, no AI policy for show, AI for business, and AI that's embodied. And if you do a mix and match between those things, you can imagine the horrors that could emerge, as well as the things that could be amazing. So what would it be like to have no diversity policy, but a fully embodied AI policy? What would it be like to have no AI policy, but a fully embodied diversity policy? What's it like to have something half and half? What issues would arise? And what kind of response do you need to take? And on LinkedIn, I actually created that table. And I went through all the different
Oh,
columns and rows and said,
amazing.
right,
Yeah.
here's how things are probably going to be right now. And here's what you should probably be doing. So do check that out on LinkedIn. And I can provide you the link to that if people
We'll
are
have to
interested.
drop. Yeah, we'll drop that into the comments, definitely. Vicky, I don't know whether Vicky's gone already. Vicky says, loving this and many apologies. I need to leave now, but loving all that is being said. We always get that people that are having to drop off for their 9 o'clock meetings. No, I love it. This thing, you know, diversity and thinking about a real ecosystem when we think about businesses, not just kind of pigeonholing diversity of people, and having, as you say, almost like just having a diversity policy rather than
Cheryl, can I just say
diversity
one
being
thing
embedded
about
across.
what I just said? Which
yeah, sure.
Last year, people may be familiar. The concept of getting this wrong, the incoherence in policies clashing together, was demonstrated last year when Google provided people with the facility to make AI-generated images, and they overshot on the diversity. And the result was that people started producing images of people asking for Second World War soldiers. And Google wanted to be representative in its diversity with its AI. So it produced black Nazis. And this is an example of what happens when you get incoherence in policies bumping up against incoherence in others. You end up with bigger incoherences that wipes billions of your share price. You know, so it's really important to get the balance right.
There's a real impact. There's an actually real impact. Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be. I'm going to try to wrap. This is just such a fascinating conversation. Junior, thank you so much for this introduction. If you didn't hear me say that before, let's just talk a little bit about collaboration, because this is something that is incredibly important for all organisations, and particularly for employee networks. It's something I'm always talking about, collaboration. What are the ingredients of collaboration that's truly impactful in your experience? What have you seen that really works in terms of driving impactful collaboration?
I think the foundations of it, in terms of the assets, if you like, that you work with, I'll come into the process in a moment, but the assets that you work with and you shape are fundamentally two things. They are faith and proof. Okay, faith and proof define trust, how people trust each other, right? And if you have faith but no proof, that can be enough for some people. They'll go on faith, right, and do things. But others, they're not so likely to do that. They want proof. They want evidence, right? They want personal experience. They want a model, an education framework that's established and proven before they invest, right? If you have all three of those kinds of proof, though, typically, if you have evidence, if you have personal experience that's real for you, you establish educational proven models, right? And then you have all three, that's going to get you the most faith and belief. And when you have faith and belief and you have proof like that, you get the highest levels of trust, right? So trust is what you're ultimately working on, and it's got to be based on cultivating faith. But you can't cultivate faith really often unless there's some kind of proof. Even if there's no real world evidence, for some people, faith comes from experience, right? Or it comes from a model. So as long as you've got the right sprinkling of those things, you'll get trust. If you've got too much experience, but not enough evidence of enough framework or model to make sense of things, it's not really going to convince everybody. A similar thing if you have got lots of fancy models, but nobody's got any personal experience of it or any evidence. You need the right mix for the context of the organization that you're in, and different organizations and environments, contexts need different mixes. But that's the assets. The second thing is the process. And the most important thing that's part of the process, I'm talking about this later today with organizational development psychologists, I've put the steps of a process of collaboration into a cycle, like a compass, right? And I said the most important step is connection. That first connection that you make with people is really important. The why behind that connection is critical. If your why is not necessarily complementary, and it doesn't need to be the same, if it's not complementary to the other people that you're working with, the connection will not be made, And if the connection doesn't get made, then you don't get a chance to build trust or faith or belief for those things. You don't get the momentum of the trust that takes you forward from the connection into your first conversation, right? And this is how it works. It's all about building momentum at each stage around trust. And if the connection is really good, you start having conversations, you might realize, oh, you know what, we should cooperate with each other. And then momentum builds and you say, let's just actually physically contribute to each other now. Let's not just talk about it and plan it and coordinate. Let's do something. And then typically, if there's sufficient contribution in both directions, people will come to want to make a commitment for the longer term and not the shorter term.
Amazing.
Right? They're prepared to take more risks. They start to genuinely collaborate. They cross this dividing line between cooperation, which is a baby form of collaboration, and true collaboration. The dividing line is on commitment. Getting their contribution mutual and respectful, such that they are prepared to commit and contract, if you will, right?
Yeah.
The collaboration happens. They create stuff together. They communicate stuff out to a wider audience and get more connections, right? And you're back full circle. But actually, of course, this is a virtuous circle. You can now connect with a wider group of people, having wider conversations. So it's more like a spiral than a circle, right?
Yeah.
But here's the amazing thing. Yeah. Collaboration begins at home. Right? You first have to connect into your own why. You need to have a connection with yourself. Have you had conversations with yourself? Have you cooperated? Have you contributed? Have you committed to yourself and collaborated and created and communicated things in a way that connects to other people beyond you? So please look at collaboration like charity. It begins at home. If it's not working in there, it's not going to work out there.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I don't even know if it's, you know what, it's really interesting. In last week's LinkedIn Live, I was talking about the power of collaboration with an employee network leader. And we were trying to almost break it down to kind of understand the why. And I'm doing a lot of this. And Junior, I'm coming for you and Lisa at NatWest. But it's really interesting because the individual that I was talking to was talking about, how she connected with individuals in the organization to come together and do this collaboration. It was across JLR as an organization. And it just made so much sense when you were talking there about the importance of that connection in the process that almost then starts.
Share how it's important how you can use it as a compass.
Yeah.
For example, if you're having difficulty in cooperating with someone, the previous step is usually the problem. And that's conversation.
Right.
The conversations you're having with people are the right conversations. If you're having problems with conversation, obviously the problem is with the previous step, which is the way that you're connecting and the why on which you're basing. And the most funny example is the bit where you cross over from cooperation to collaboration. And that's an issue to do with the commitment bit. Because if people are stalled at the commitment bit, whatever place you're stuck at, if you want to find your way and use this thing as a compass, look at the place where you're stuck and then look at the previous step. I gave an example of people getting married. And I said, look, I know someone who gave everything to their fiance, that they wanted to be their fiance, and they were looking to get married to them, and they were going to propose to them. And then they went over and asked them if they would marry them. And the person that he was asking said no. And he said, I don't understand. I've given you everything. I've bought you a car. I've taken you on holidays. I've taken you on meals. And she said, and I've sought your advice on various things. And she said, but actually, I've given you advice. And she said, but you know what? You've never actually asked anything of me. Right. You're always giving. And in teams, this is really important, because if you're always giving to an employee, but you're never drawing on their value, soon enough they'll feel that they aren't of any value and they'll leave. The contribution has to be both ways. By all means contribute, but seek contribution too. Otherwise people won't feel valued and they won't commit. They'll just say, no,
Absolutely.
sorry. It seems to be all about you and nothing of anything to do with my value.
So it's almost like there are these layers, aren't there, that kind of have to be in place. And maybe if something is going awry, so maybe if somebody is trying to form a collaboration, whether it's with a colleague or a different network or an organization, and it's not happening, or it feels like it's going wrong, maybe it's looking, as you're saying, at maybe the earlier steps, what's
sometimes
missing.
That's what you have to do. For example, let's say you have committed, right, and you're beginning collaboration, and there are subtle things coming up that you seem to have missed, and you don't know what's going on. You realize there was a little kind of side branch of someone's why at the first point of connection and conversation that kept getting neglected, that nuance. And then as you go further and further, these nuances get magnified, right? These differences, this distinction. And it isn't until it's sufficiently magnified further down the chain that people realize, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem for you. And that's because the precision of people's radar at the beginning in terms of connection was low fidelity, low resolution. And when you have a high level of resolution of how you're connected to someone, the why, then you're more likely to figure out those little nuances, and they're not likely to trip you up further down the line when everything's been magnified.
Yeah. Do you have to be aligned on the why for the collaboration to move forward? It's just a question, but no. It just has to be that the why is clear.
This is a lesson for me. I only learned literally in the last month or two. Okay. I thought a long time, especially with AI, alignment's really important, right? Are you aligning to the right values? Are you aligning to the right data sets? All this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I realized something from a spiritual conversation I had with someone. I said, look, you know, if you don't have integrity, if you're not true to yourself, then it doesn't matter what you're aligned to. People look at you and they won't be able to trust you, you know?
Yeah.
And I said, which comes first? You know, is it alignment or integrity? And I said, it's integrity. You've got to be true within yourself.
Yeah.
You've got to have a state of grace within you that honors what's authentic in you. Once you have that integrity, that solidity of character, then when you align to anything, people know that you're going to follow through, whatever it is, because the integrity is in place first, right? So integrity first, and then choose your alignment. If you try and do it the other way around and hope you're going to come into integrity as a result of your alignment, it hardly ever works that way.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And the fact that you don't necessarily have to be, you don't have to necessarily completely agree with somebody on everything to be able to collaborate, I guess is kind of,
that's
there's something about that.
And in the collaboration cycle, I specify that if people aren't coming together on the same why, and there's three different reasons why they come together. They come together because they want to empower each other and do something serious. They want to come together because they want to have fun, or they want to come together because they're just curious and want to be engaging with one another. And it's the right mix that creates the connection. But sometimes people are at odds with each other, and the only way you can get that connection is through processes for conflict resolution. I personally use nonviolent communication to ensure people's needs and requests are honored and people aren't being judgmental in those situations. And if you use those kind of processes, you will form a connection. I learned some of this in my training as a mediation, civil and commercial workplace mediation. If you can handle including nonviolent communication as a standard part of the process of connecting people, you're going to get the most amazing conversations and empowering conversations that lead to sustainable collaboration further down the line.
And which I'm conscious those that are still with us, it's been an incredible conversation. We had a comment there from I did find Philip Wilson, wonderful insights on the risk of automation first. Thank you. So you've talked about connecting people, and obviously it's incredibly important, but you've also talked about how we connect with ourselves and how it all starts with ourselves, right? It starts internally. And you have developed tools for connecting people with purpose and performance. So how can, for employee network leaders in particular that are listening to this, and we've got some on today, good morning, Andrea Southall from RACS. How can employee network leaders use approaches? So some of the tools that people can use to connect, whether it's journaling or coaching, etc., to support development. How can employee network leaders make the best of these tools to kind of help with that, connecting themselves with purpose and performance?
I've got a remote control of my TV here. And in order for me to get this roughly balanced and stable, I need to support it under its center of gravity, right? Where all of its energy is focused, right? If I support this anywhere else, what's going to happen? It's going to be unstable. It's going to cost me a lot of energy to try and keep it balanced. I can't build anything on top of this unless it's stable and it's balanced. And if I'm not supporting it anywhere other than its center of gravity, it's going to cost a lot of energy to build things on top. And whatever I build on top is probably not going to have integrity and not going to be sustainable, right? So the most important thing is to discover the center of gravity, if you like, of the system of people that you have. And even the people, individuals themselves, what's their center of gravity? And when a dancer moves through their center of gravity, or a boxer turns around that center of gravity, you see that they often move with a kind of grace, right?
Yeah.
When they don't, they look awkward. They get punched when they shouldn't have done. And it's all about conservation of energy at the end of the day. And whenever you move anything or support anything through its center of gravity, you exercise conservation of energy, right? But there's a more important factor, and it's not to do with following the path of least resistance or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's actually something where I said in a conference a few years ago, before you follow the path of least resistance, you need to become the form of least resistance. Okay,
right.
That means who you are, the shape of who you are, how authentic, how true you're being to yourself. Because if I throw an egg through the water or through the air, it's highly streamlined and aerodynamic. It doesn't matter what path it follows; it'll always experience the least resistance. But if I throw a hedgehog through the air, I wouldn't do that, animal lovers. It's going to experience lots of turbulence and things like that. It doesn't matter whether it goes through water or air. It's going to experience a lot of waste of energy, right? So the first thing is to become the form of least resistance. Right. And that's about character and integrity, alignment, these kind of things. And then the second thing is please move through the center of your thoughts. Please move through the center of your feelings, move through the center of your relationships. And when you work with those centers together and you have a common center of gravity, you have this literally, when you have that common center of gravity, you have gravitas within you. And when you have gravitas within you and between you with people in your department, your team, then you have a presence which everybody wants to be around and with, because it's something that gives them a sense of integrity within themselves, and they get a feeling of belonging. So the physics of this is very simple. You just need to find the center of gravity, if you like. And this is what my technology I created 17 years ago. It did create a psychometric. It assessed someone's needs, mental, physical, emotional, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, against their emotional and social intelligence, and asked them, how well are you aware of this need? How well are you managing this need and regulating it? How well are you developing it for yourself and others? Give yourself a score out of 10. And then I put the scores on a grid, and in paint by numbers way, turn them into colors. But those numbers are like weights. And I could figure out with AI where the center of gravity of this person's needs was and on that day, and say, that's the need you need to go and pay attention to today to make the best use of your energy. And when you combine that together with others in a team, you find the center of gravity of the team, the organization, and say, today, this is what your focus should be in terms of alignment to your purpose. People often talk about life purpose, but actually there's a purpose for your day that you've got to get right first. And if this priority for your day, your daily priority, over time, there's certain priorities that keep recurring, and you realize these seem to come up quite a lot. There's a center of gravity to these priorities, and that center of gravity to that priority is the longer term purpose of those individuals in that team. And the technology can reveal all of this kind of stuff and even indicate, right, where do you need to go and support stuff? Where do you need to change stuff? And where do you just need to leave things alone as they are because they're in the process of changing? And those three approaches of knowing what to support, knowing what to change and challenge, and knowing what to leave alone because it's not broken, doesn't need fixing, with that kind of intelligence and technology, and coupled with human interventions based on humanity and compassion, empathy, flourishing, those kind of things, you get the most sustained energy, vitality in an organization. And that's what you want. You want people to be brought to life. You want your business to be brought to life, your customers, the world, It's all about life. And if you work through the center of gravity of things and you work with the form of least resistance, you support change and reflect and hold on the right things, and you can use technology to help you to fine tune that and scale it. You're going to have an amazing, vibrant, animated, living future.
Oh, wow. Honestly, I mean, Jazz, you've got an incredible way with words, which obviously, because I know that you'll have done a lot of speaking kind of in your time, but you blend sort of like, the scientific with the human, with the spiritual, with the, it's just absolutely incredible.
There's no boundaries for me, unfortunately, in that situation. Continuum.
Well, and
I'm not a silo.
We're not one thing, are we? We're not one thing. But as you were talking there about the importance,
I am not a silo. I'm not a number. I am not a silo.
Absolutely. Because, you were talking there about center of gravity and, becoming the form of least resistance. I was thinking, Cheryl, you need to get your journal back out, because I've got like this like productivity planner where one of the questions it asks is, what's the one most important thing you need to do today? Or, what's the one? And I'm terrible at sticking to it. But as you were talking, I was like, Cheryl, you need to get back to this. You need to, because it does help. It really helps to center you, at least, for
Well,
that
that,
day. And
that
then, as you said,
technology,
themes
my
come
last
up.
100 coaching clients were all women
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. They use that
Right.
technology daily as a journaling for 3 months to constantly realign and
Yeah.
sort out the integrity of their center of gravity. And now, when you're constantly centered, there's a consequence to constantly being centered. You become very immovable in the right ways, right?
Yeah.
But you also become very fluid and agile in the right ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And you have a grace to it. Now, here's the thing I said to a colleague yesterday. So when you're in a state of grace long enough, physically, it looks beautiful, right? If you're moving as a dancer or a ballet, whatever. But if you're moved on the inside while you're in a state of grace, or you're helping other people feel moved into a state of grace, they experience a beauty about themselves. And sometimes, no matter what someone looks like on the surface physically, if someone's in a continuous, sustained state of grace, when you're with them, you feel beauty. You feel beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's a different kind of beauty to physical beauty. And it comes from being in a state of grace, being centered continuously, and always being in integrity.
Yeah. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I love that, obviously, we've talked about AI and we've talked about tech and all of that, but actually the thread through it has been kind of humanity. And it's just, this was the conversation I wasn't expecting, but absolutely was the conversation I needed. And hopefully for anybody that's listening as well, it was. And I feel for the employee network leaders, and I mean, obviously we've got Junior on, who I know in his day job is also a coach, but often employee network leaders are having to almost like give the advice to other colleagues. And, some of the things that we've talked about here in terms of, people kind of becoming centered, becoming centered around what's important, is just, I feel that even just that, even just that one takeaway, and a tool that can help people to do that in itself can be so incredibly transformative for individuals, especially if they're struggling in the workplace. And some of the things that we talked about, struggling to manage through change, just kind of becoming centered about who you are, what's important to you, the integrity piece, that in itself could be an absolute game changer.
A lot of this isn't book knowledge. Okay, it comes from lived experience from which you draw common sense which distills into wisdom, and eventually distills, as I said, into intelligence, into knowledge, information, data, the complete reverse process of how things are done with AI. So it's another takeaway for people to register, right? If we were to put AI and how it learns and how it generates things next to human beings, you'd see they're on completely opposing kind of journeys. The reality is this is a circle, right? Because even when we get to data from lived experience, we can start to go in reverse. We can start taking the data that we've generated to generate new information, new knowledge, new intelligence, new wisdom, new common sense, new lived experience, new conscience. So we operate in a circle. That's the reality. We're not operating in a line. It's not linear. But currently, unfortunately, AI does operate in a very linear way. It doesn't seem to take the reverse route. But there are some aspects of AI, they call them back propagation, right? They literally go back and try again.
Yeah.
But the thing that they're always missing is lived experience. AI do not have any humanity as a consequence of not having their own lived experience, So as much as AI does is back propagation, if it does it without any humanity or a lived experience or common sense, it's nowhere near going to be as powerful or empowering or insightful as human beings are.
Yeah, absolutely. Jazz, it's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you. What final thoughts do you want to leave some of the people that have joined us this morning? What's your final thoughts or words of enkeragement for?
Well, this applies to AI as much as it does to human beings. But I was in the riots that happened in London a few years ago in Tottenham, where Mark Duggan was shot. I was living in the area at the time. I was invited by the police to do research into why the riots happened. I came back and I was sitting in the police commander's room in Tottenham with community leaders on one side and police people on the other. I said, you're suffering from a disease in this community, and it's collaboration illiteracy. And children, when they learn at school, they learn literacies, reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? But there's an additional literacy they need. And a lot of people are illiterate in it. And this literacy is in collaboration, right? Now, I know children, I know my own experience at school, where I experienced racism, bullying, and what happened with me. I got in my own way. When I couldn't connect and have the right conversations with myself and couldn't collaborate at home with myself, I got in my own way and I lost my way. And I hanged out with other people who had also lost their way. And you know what? With the Tottenham riots, that's a fundamental cause. People were hanging out with other people who also lost their way. And together they lost their way even more. And the result was the riots. But there are other children who don't get in their own way. They find their ways because they learn to collaborate with themselves first, right? And even if they fail in their grades, right, and leave school, because they know how to collaborate, they still make it in the world. There are people I know who are highly educated but do not know how to collaborate. And then as soon as they left school, despite their grades, they end up being homeless and pitiful. Right. And I'm perfectly an example of that, because in 2008, I became homeless. And I know why I became homeless. I failed to collaborate with myself. I got in my own way and I lost my way. And in my TED talk, you probably see me reference that. But this thing about getting out of your own way so you can find your way and then hang out with other people who are doing that and collaborate with them to make a difference in the world, as opposed to getting in your own way and hanging out with other people who've got in their own way and getting in your own way and other people's way even more. It's a really important distinction that needs to begin with literacy, with children from a very, very early age. Who learns collaboration literacy at school? It's the fourth R, believe it or not. You know, people talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? The fourth R is rapport. It's creating rapport with yourself, learning how to create rapport with others. And when you are a master craftsman in rapport, right, it's amazing how much knowledge, information, intelligence, they don't mean anything at the end of the day. What matters is that resonance that you can cultivate with someone, that energy that makes people want to be with you, because they come to life in connection with that resonance that arises from that rapport. So it's another R, resonance. But resonance and rapport, very, very closely related with each other.
Yeah. Amazing. Honestly, I feel, this has been absolutely invaluable, and collaboration is so incredibly important. So I'm glad that we've been able to finish there with some really practical tips for everyone. And thank you for sharing more of your story as well. For anybody that hasn't heard Jazz's TEDx talk, I'd really encourage you to go and find it. Have you got a link on your profile to your TEDx talk, or people can just find it on YouTube?
I do believe I do. Yeah. It's in one of the featured items, I think. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I would absolutely encourage you to check that out. We're going to be wrapping things up now, but thank you so much for everyone that has joined us. Mick Gillick, they're very insightful. Collaboration and literacy. Rapport is power. Yeah, maybe that's going to be another T-shirt. I think rapport is the fourth R. Jazz, thank you so much for I feel like we could have talked for a long time, but thank you so much for this. For anybody that's been with us for the whole hour and 3 minutes, thank you for joining us on this hot Friday morning here in the UK. Well, it's hot for the UK, right? We know it's not really that hot, but hot for the UK. And
thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cheryl, for having me on today.
On the replay. Oh, you're welcome. And Jazz, and I know it was relatively short-ish notice for you as well. So thank you so much.
This kind of thing you don't need to prepare for. If you're living it, you embody it. You can just radiate it, can't you?
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a really great weekend, and I'll see you next week.